Okay, City of God is a masterpiece, and let me tell you why. Hey guys, Jordan here, back with another movie review, and this week I'm going to be doing the 2002 City of God movie. I really enjoyed this one, and please go watch this before you watch this video, because this movie is an absolute masterpiece, and it needs to be seen by as many people as possible. This one will really stick with you. There's a lot that happens into it, there's tons of characters, and it stays with you. I can't stop thinking about it, and I know that it will have a similar effect on other people that watch it as well. Before I continue, I'm going to let you know that there will be spoilers in this review, so spoilers. If you're still here and you've seen it, I'm proud of you. This movie is great. Let's get into it. So City of God follows multiple different characters, but it primarily follows two boys, Rocket and Lil Ze, who are both from the slums in Rio De Janeiro. The two follow completely different paths. Rocket decides to pursue his passion for photography and just trying to make a better life for himself, while Lil Z completely embraces where he's from and becomes one of the biggest drug-dealing gangsters that the town's ever seen. Basically two polar opposites. Both from the same town, but both take completely two different walks of life. Just as a whole, this movie is really heartbreaking to watch. This movie is really heartbreaking. I mean, it completely numbs you to killing. There is so much murder in this that it just becomes normal. And it's not if someone's going to get shot, it's when and where are they going to die. And it's really sad. It's tough to watch, but it's also just such a good portrayal of this type of life, and it's definitely worth a watch. I think my favorite thing about this movie is the way that the filmmakers reveal information. It's really interesting. They do two different things where they'll play, so the first part is they'll play the scene through, or they'll play part of a scene through from one character's perspective, and then right after it they'll play it again from another character's perspective, and then they'll play it again, and sometimes they'll just keep doing that, and they'll do really fast, like back to back of the same scene to reveal different information. But another thing that they'll do too is kind of the same thing, but where more traditionally, where you show a scene, and then later that scene comes back, and then you see it one way, and then when you find out new information later in the movie, then you re-see that. You rethink about that scene, and you're like, oh, now this is what it actually meant. It's really cool that they do both. I think that that's what makes this story structure unique. It takes something that's very normal in cinema, and I think adds its own flavor to it with the bouncing around both different things. And with how many characters are in this film, I think it's absolutely necessary. The whole thing revolves around character perspective. So bouncing around between the characters and sometimes showing scenes back to back and sometimes revealing stuff later, I just think really works in this. I think that makes sense. If not, just roast me. That's fine. One of the things I like in just any movie in general is if the first time I'm watching a scene and I've never seen this movie before, and I see it, and the filmmaker wants me to see something, and I see it that way, and that's how I see it. And then later, they reveal something to me, and then I remember that scene, I'm like, oh my gosh, what it actually meant was this. I think that's a really cool thing that film can do, and I really think City of God is an example of how to do that. So I think the next part that I liked the most was the cinematography of the film. The look of this film completely made it for me. It matches the style of the story perfectly. I read that it's actually was shot on Super 16mm instead of 35mm, which is the traditional film cinema look. And it just makes it feel really rugged and really raw and just a little bit more gritty. It feels fast-paced. Some of the camera movements are completely like jerky. And it just really makes you feel like you're in the movie with them. You feel like you're a character walking around with them, not just a bystander or a third-party viewer watching. You literally feel like you're kind of in the movie with how it's shot. And I think that matches the story perfectly with how crazy the story structure and the plot lines are. So some more specific things that I enjoyed. One of the first scenes is them chasing a chicken. And it eventually gets to Rocket, who we didn't know was Rocket at the time when we first are introduced to him. But later, obviously, we find out that he's one of the main characters. Anyway, there's a really cool 360 transition shot completely around Rocket from the street where he's with this chicken to back to when he's a kid and he's playing goalie on the soccer pitch. It's just a really cool transition. I love that shot to convey time. Another thing that the film does is when they're younger, they have like this bronze look, and it's a lot more orange to the town. And as they get older, it flattens out and is more gray and blue and dark. Just a really cool way to show different time periods. Obviously, I think there's some deeper meaning behind the color of the film when they're younger. Maybe, the orange is more just them being youthful and it can still kind of seem happy. And then as they get older, they realize how terrible their situation really is. But it's also just color is such a really good way to show different time periods, especially if you're going to cut between the two. It's a perfect way to do that, and they handled it really well in this movie. Okay, so there's a funny little detail that I noticed. So there's a moment when Rocket is kind of struggling, and he always kinds of tries to turn to violence, but really like he can't bring himself to do it. One of those is when he goes to rob this restaurant, and he goes, "I'm gonna do it. I'll do it. I'm gonna stick him up." And we get in there, and then we cut, and he's talking to this really cute waitress. He gets her number that she writes down on a piece of paper, and he's like, I couldn't do it. She was too cool. Later, a couple shots later, they get into a car with a guy, and Rocket, they start rolling up a joint to smoke, and Rocket says how good he is at rolling joints. If only he was as good with talking to girls as he is with rolling joints, he would be set for life. The next shot is him smoking the piece of paper that she wrote her number on. So he used that to roll up a joint. And it's just a really funny little detail to add, like, what he just said. Like, it's like smooth move, bro. Like, you just said you're not good with girls. You got a number, and then you burned it away because you smoked it and you rolled it into a paper. Later in the movie, there's two drug dealers that kind of run the town, Carrot and Lil Ze. They both have their parties, and basically some stuff goes down, and they end up not liking each other, and they start a drug war between the both parties. This goes on for like a year. Like, this is a long battle just in the slums between these two drug dealers and their gangs. There's a moment near the end of the movie where both Carrot and Lil Z get arrested, and they're both crammed in the back of a trunk of the police car. And I just thought that was such an interesting dynamic. We don't get a shot or anything of them in there, but literally both people that want to kill each other more than anyone else are just staring at each other in the back of a police car. I think that's great. It's such a cool dynamic to have. It's literally the two polar opposites just looking each other in the face, and they can't do anything because they're in handcuffs. Really cool little addition there. They didn't have to put that in there, and I like that they did. The last thing I think I have to say, guys, is that I think the final shot is a perfect way to end this movie. I also think it's just a perfect shot in general. It might be one of my favorite final shots of any movie. Just because of how much... It's literally a summary of the film in one shot. It's a perfect full circle moment for the characters that are still alive. Basically what's happening is it's a simple pan from one group of characters to the other. And the first part, it starts on Rocket and his best friend, who both of them had chose to try to have a better life and move closer to the better part of the city. Rocket following his passion for photography, and I think the other friend in some sort of writing. I think he's also kind of involved. He's not a photographer, but same kind of thing. And they are walking up the street, so they're walking away from us and a little bit to the left. And they're walking up closer to the city. I think that this is symbolizing after all this is gone, because right before this, Rocket had gotten all the photos to show the corrupt police officers and to show that Lil Z has died. And we see them walking back up into the city, walking back into their better life that they've started to create for themselves. And then, as they kind of pass out of frame, the runts walk into frame, walking the opposite direction from Rocket and his friend. And the runts had just shot, brutally killed Lil Z before this. And again, we see them walking the opposite direction of Rocket and his friend. And they are going into the heart of the slums. This is such a perfect shot because the people that are doing better for themselves are climbing up back to where they need to go. and the people that are just following into it are just strolling in to the heart of the slums. And it's just really sad. The next part, so we follow them kind of down one of the roads, and they start talking about how they're going to sell drugs, who they want to kill next, who's going to do what, how's it going to go. And basically this is saying that this whole cycle just starts over and will continue to go on forever. That kind of stuff that the runts were talking about is the exact same thing that Lil Z was talking about with Benny. What this shot is showing us is that this process is an endless cycle. Once the oldest kids, the ones that had come into young men and gone down this route of selling drugs and violence, once they get shot and killed, now the young ones, they just step in. And then there's another Lil Z. It's really heartbreaking. It's sad because it's way deeper than just the kids themselves or just the people in the town. There's nothing that can help the town, so they just embrace it. And it just never ends. There's always going to be another big drug dealer. There's always going to be another crazy murderer in the city of God, unfortunately. At least that's what the filmmakers are trying to tell us with that final shot. I think that's all I got. City of God is definitely a really dramatic and really personal film. I think it's even was based on a true story, which is just even sadder. But it's so well made. It's so well done. You have to go watch this movie. It is borderline perfect, especially for what they were going for and the style. Everything hits. It's all there. I'm curious to what you think of this movie. I'd love to see any comments and just any sort of engagement. If you could like or share or anything like that, any sort of engagement really helps out our videos. So thank you very much for watching this, and go watch City of God, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.